A very warm welcome to Supply Chain Mind, a series of podcasts that are designed to spur discussion and debate in the areas of logistics, procurement, and supply chain. My name is Liam Fassam. I'm a senior lecturer of supply chain management. You can contact me on Twitter at Liam Fassam. Welcome to this week's topic. Hello. This week we said we'd do something different. We would get rid of the slide decks, hurrah, and we would have a discussion, which is a much better way to do things in the classroom. So I've picked the area of risk and resilience in a supply chain, which is a topic constantly talked about, something that businesses have been trying to find the answer for thousands of years. No one's cracked it yet, and no one will, because it's not about eradicating risk, it's about mitigating risk, because risks constantly change. I think that's what we need to have a discussion this week. And I've chosen a couple of articles just to get us going and give some flavour of risk. And what I'd like you to do is have a read through some of these articles. I'd like you to have a think about risk in your own businesses, and I'd like you to bring some element of risk identification to the class to have a discussion. So starting off with this article that I read yesterday, quite nice, talks about risk, talks about how one of the ways to mitigate risk is sharing data. Yeah, it's a no-brainer. Collaborating, it's not always easy though. You've got to collaborate with your competitors. It's something we call co-petition. So we've got to collaborate with our competitors to share information, and that in itself creates additional risks and issues, which we'll talk about in the class. But one of the things I argue with risk is the fact that risk comes in many forms. We're going to talk today about fraud, slavery, and terrorism. And each one of those is viewed in isolation. We don't seem to, as businesses, say, okay, we have risk. Risk is a basket of problems, and we need to understand that basket of problems and understand the mitigation strategies against them. Instead, what we tend to do is we tend to focus on one problem at a time, which entails us then turning our backs on all the other risks that then manifest ourselves in the business. And then we finish dealing with this other risk, and we turn around and there's all these risks there, and you're like, oh God. And then what I term the firefighting of risk. You just bounce from one risk to the next risk to the next risk to the next risk, not really creating any kind of resilience in your supply chain. So we'll have a talk about that. One of the more perturbing things is, I don't want to unnecessarily bash people here, but I think it's important while I'm having a technological nightmare here, is the FT have interviewed the expert, Mr. Caldwell, and I absolutely agree what he's saying in terms of supply chain compliance and sharing of data and risk management. And the one thing I'd like to pick up is terminology. He's suggesting that as you go down the supply chain, things become more complex and there's a need to analyse this area. Actually, what he really means is as we go up the supply chain towards the raw material, because as we go down the supply chain in true terminology, true supply chain terminology, put my brain in gear, as we go down, we go towards the customer. So his terminology is incorrect, and one could argue that with this constant misuse of technology, this constant misunderstanding in terms of communication, is causing us to make the whole risk and resilience management of supply chains much harder than it is. And actually, you know what? We're never going to share data, and we're never going to be able to collaborate until we can get the bleeding terminology correct. So I don't mean to bash, but question everything you read and ensure that terminology is right, or else it becomes potentially confusing. We're saying what you're saying in the text is as you get to the consumer, it gets more complex. Actually, what he's saying is as you go upstream towards the raw material, it gets more complex. So, yeah, that could have, if that was a report or some sort of official process, that could have quite damaging outcomes, I would imagine. Anyway, moving on to my favourite topic, food fraud. I want to have a discussion in class about this topic because you guys eat food clearly and buy food, so you are consumers in this, and I want us to map and walk through a food supply chain and look at some of the areas of weakness in a supply chain, and then I want to compare that against your own supply chain. So I don't want to spend the whole evening talking about food fraud, although I could. I want to start looking at your businesses and try and tease out areas in other industries just to show the similarities and that there are open doors in every supply chain, regardless of the product or commodity. This one, yeah, I quite like this. I read this yesterday. It's about shipping. So this ship, one example, left Libya, went to Tunisia, stopped off the coast of Tunisia for 3.5 hours and turned all radar and tracking devices off. Yeah, interesting one that. And then decided to continue on its way into Italy. Now, I don't know whether it's because it's Friday and I'm being a bit cynical, but why would you sit off the coast of countries that are, shall we say, rather volatile at the moment with some of the geopolitical things that are going on, turn your tracker off for 3.5 hours and then head off into a European port? Yeah, well, many things could be happening there. You could be moving people, cargo, guns, yeah, a whole plethora of stuff could be going on. And what this article is saying is we're just not tracking the problem. It's a big problem. I mean, this is stat here: 17 ships reported to be using false identities. These ships come straight into our ports, pretty much undetected, stroll in, berth. Yeah, you can search ships, but it's impossible to search a container ship top to bottom. It's just you spend months doing it. There's so many nooks and crannies in there. So it's an open door. It is an open door to global supply chains and risk. So we're going to talk about that. We have a very, very secure aviation industry, yet our shipping industry seems to still be back in the times of Admiral Nelson. So we'll have a chat about that one. Excuse me. This again, I'm not sure if it's Cynical Friday for Liam, but I read this headline this morning and I had to look twice. I think it's a great thing that any organisation is looking to be slave-proof in its supply chains, but I would have expected the Vatican to have been doing this a while ago. However, I'm not going to judge. We can discuss that in the class. This again, wasn't it just a matter of time? Child labour, Syrian refugees, you see them on the news. We would potentially be looking and saying, how horrible the situation is and something has to be done. There are large organisations set up to exploit these people that will be looking at these refugees coming in as an opportunity. We'll be discussing modern slavery and how that affects your supply chains, because each one of you work in businesses with a turnover of more than 36 million. So we'll have a chat about that. And finally, when I was putting this together this morning, and you know who you are, sent me an email about wonky veg, because we talked about this in the classroom amongst many things that we talk about in there. And I want to put this in because how is this a risk? How is wonky veg a risk? We discussed the perfection of veg and straight carrots and straight bananas, and if it's not conforming, it goes into the bin, becomes waste. So that's a risk, isn't it? Because you've got global food supply chains and there's a food security issue, and we're throwing loads of food in the bin, yet ASDA have come up with a fabulous, innovative business model to mitigate the risk of waste. So, yeah, it's quite ironic and quite funny, but it's serious at the same time. So we've got different risks ranging from terrorism, human trafficking, fraudulent behaviour to wonky veg. They're all risks. And I want to discuss more risks on Tuesday. So have a good weekend, have a think about risk, and then on Tuesday we'll have a discussion about it. Cheers.